The Dreamcast is a system that never got to realize its full potential. Its early demise meant that many games that were in development for the console had to be either moved to other platforms or cancelled altogether. Yet at the same time, some games were cancelled even before Sega's departure from hardware. Whatever the reason, the Dreamcast library had potential to grow significantly, if only things had worked out differently. Let's take a journey into an alternate world and take a glimpse at the games that might have been. This is episode 7 of The Games That Never Were. Worms Pinball by Team 17 is a digital pinball game that was originally released on PC in 1998 and shortly thereafter on the PS1 as a PAL exclusive. The PC version was titled Addiction Pinball, but the PS1 version was renamed to Worms Pinball to capitalize on the popularity of the franchise at the time. A Dreamcast version of the game was announced shortly after the initial 2 releases and was to take on the Worms Pinball title. The game features 2 different tables to play on, one based on Worms 2 and the other based on a Team 17 racing game called World Rally Fever. These tables could be played either by yourself or with a friend by passing the controller back and forth. The goal of pinball is to stay on the table as long as possible to get a high score, but depending on which table you choose to play, you'll have a different set of objectives which you can complete for bonus points. These objectives include anything from collecting weapons to earning victories and killing enemy worms on the Worms table, and jumping off ramps and crossing the finish line on the World Rally Fever table. There are also mini-games which can be initiated by hitting your ball on a certain part of the table. One such minigame has you guiding a super sheep through a path of balloons with the ultimate goal of blowing up a worm at the end, and another is essentially a game of 3-card Monty. Which stage you're currently playing, there are 4 on each table, will determine the type of minigame you'll get. Completing any of these minigames successfully will earn you a large amount of bonus points. Both tables in the game do an excellent job of representing their respective franchises with the use of sound effects and graphics from the original games. The Worms table even makes liberal use of the squeaky voice acting which the games are known for. In addition, the physics are very well done with the tables and balls reacting much like they would in real life. Worms Pinball was scheduled for release in November of 2000, but after missing its deadline, the game's publisher Infogrames announced in December that the game had been cancelled. They cited the reason for the cancellation was because they felt the game wouldn't be successful enough, and they wanted to focus their resources on the Dreamcast port of Unreal Tournament, which was due out the next year. The game was 100% complete upon its cancellation, which is evidenced by a copy of the game that was discovered in 2008. This copy was dated September 9th, 2000, and was labeled as version 1.0. This copy of the game is owned by a private collector and is yet to be released online, possibly due to legal issues. Gunbeat by Treasure was a racing game that was first announced in 1999 for Sega's Naomi arcade hardware, and was also planned for home console release on the Dreamcast. The game was to be Treasure's first attempt at a 3D video game. Gunbeat was a very unique racer that attempted to combine elements of a kart racer and a shooter into one game. Adding to the uniqueness is the unusual selection of vehicles, which consist of everything from a futuristic hover bike to a robot to a giant hamster-like creature. In the game, you'll have 3 different modes to choose from. The main mode is Race Mode, in which you must finish 3 races in a set amount of time, but there's also a Time Attack mode and a multiplayer mode where you could compete with up to 3 other players. Unlike most racing games, the goal is not simply to win the race, you also need to defeat enemies and rack up as many points as possible. In typical kart racer fashion, there would be items scattered around each of the game's tracks that would help give you an advantage over your opponents and enemies. Unlike most kart racers, however, you would always start with a basic gun, which has 3 different shot types: normal, magic, and laser. Much like in a shoot 'em up, you could improve that gun by picking up power-ups. Your gun isn't the only weapon in the game though, as you can also pick up traps. These traps can be dropped anywhere on the track and consist of things like an exploding box, which would slow down any racer that hits it. The traps can either be avoided, or they can also be destroyed by using a gun. Being an arcade game, Gunbeat was a little shy on content, consisting of only 4 vehicles and 3 different tracks: City, Snowy Mountain, and Ancient Ruins. Like with most arcade to home console ports, however, there was likely additional content planned for the Dreamcast version. Treasure was likely planning to release the game to arcades in late 2000, but on May 22nd of that year they announced the development of the game had been halted. They never gave a solid reason for the cancellation, but chances are that it was due to losing the game's lead developer. It's also rumored that Treasure wasn't satisfied with how the game was turning out. A prototype of the arcade version is likely to exist, as it was shown off at multiple trade shows before its cancellation. Jump Runner by Glass Ghost Games was a sci-fi action-adventure game that was first announced in 1999 for both PC and Dreamcast. The story of the game revolves around a space pirate named Ethan Fall, who is asked by a man in a bar to deliver a mysterious antique puzzle to an associate. This sounds simple enough, but things get more complicated when a gang of assassins known as the Brethren kill the man before he can tell you where the associate is located. With the assassins right on his tail, Ethan manages to escape to his spaceship. Unknown to Ethan, the puzzle is what the Brethren are after, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. When you first start off in the game, you'll begin as a lowly criminal, traveling around the seediest parts of the galaxy and earning a reputation that will propel you up the ranks of the criminal world. You'll begin by taking just about any job that pays, mostly smuggling illegal goods between planets. Every job you complete in the game will earn you money, which can be used to buy new equipment, weapons, and ships. Once you start gaining more notoriety, you'll begin taking on much larger gigs like bounty hunting, kidnapping, assassination, and sabotage. Of course, as you gain more fame in the criminal world, you'll also become a much bigger target for intergalactic law enforcement. If you become too hot of a target, you can cool things down by being a little more covert during jobs. Most of these missions aren't directly tied to the main storyline, but could indirectly affect its outcome. The main plot would be advanced when you reached a certain level of notoriety in the game or visit specific locations. Not only was Jump Runner to feature a single-player campaign, but an online component was planned as well. The online mode was to offer a persistent online world where players would join gangs of criminals and fight for dominance. Glass Ghost Games was developing quite the ambitious title, combining a huge universe to explore, RPG-like character progression, an intriguing storyline, and a unique criminal perspective not seen in many games. Unfortunately, the game might have been too ambitious for its own good, as it would never see the light of day. Originally planned for an early 2000 release, Jump Runner mysteriously disappeared from the radar. Neither the PC version or the Dreamcast version ever made it outside the development studio. It's unknown when or why the game was cancelled, or how far it was into the development process. Armada 2 Exodus by Metro 3D was an open-world space shooter that was first announced shortly after the release of the original Armada in October of 1999. Unlike the original game, which only had local multiplayer, Armada 2 was to include an online mode. Like in the original game, you would choose to play as one of 6 human races that all had a common goal of defending their homeworld from the alien Armada. Each of these races would have their own special ability, such as being able to steal weapon technology from enemies, cloak their ship, or commandeer enemy ships. There isn't much of a storyline, as the game was intended to be open-ended and would consist entirely of randomly generated missions. Progress in the game would be made by leveling up your ship. Every 4 levels, you would earn upgrades to things like your weapons and shields. Progress wouldn't be limited to your ship, however. You could also level up space stations, planetary colonies, and allies. As you do this, you'll be able to research new technologies that will help you in your fight against the Armada. Online multiplayer was a big focus for Exodus. Every player that went online would have their own world, and players could freely travel between these worlds. When other players join your world, they can help you battle enemies, complete missions, and trade items with you. Trading items with other players could be very beneficial, since their world may have weapons and technology that have not been invented in your world. Metro 3D claimed that there would be over 1.2 million items that could exist in the game. Armada 2 was looking to be a fantastic follow-up to the original, with expanded RPG elements, a more detailed world to explore, and of course online multiplayer. The online mode is something that Metro 3D wanted to include in the original Armada, but was unable to because Sega's online network wasn't ready in time for its release. Exodus was originally slated for release on August 31st of 2000, but after several delays, the Dreamcast version of the game was officially cancelled on March 20th, 2001. With Sega's shift from hardware to software, Metro felt that releasing the game on the Dreamcast would not be profitable. Even though they still intended to release the game on other platforms, it suffered from several more delays and redesigns, and was eventually scrapped altogether. Gameplay that was released of the game suggests it was well into development, so a beta of the Dreamcast version may exist. Geist Force, developed by Sega, was a 3D shooter that was rumored to be the very first game Sega had in development for the Dreamcast. While this is yet to be confirmed, it was still a very early game and started development even before the Dreamcast hardware was finalized. The story of the game takes place in the distant future on a world that's been invaded by hostile aliens. As one of the fighter pilots for the Geist Force, it's your job to save the planet from being taken over by the invaders. Geist Force's gameplay is very much inspired by games like Nintendo's Star Fox and Sega's own Panzer Dragoon series. Much like in those games, you'll be flying on rails that prevent you from straying too far off course. Regardless, you'll fly through a good variety of terrains such as snowy mountains, deep canyons, futuristic cities, raging rivers, and even active volcanoes, all while shooting down alien creatures and spaceships. In order to defeat enemies, you'll have a variety of weapons at your disposal, including lasers, missiles, and even a smart bomb that will destroy every enemy on the screen. You can also lock onto enemies with your laser by holding down a button and moving your aiming reticle over the enemies you wish to target. The game features 6 stages total, and at the end of each stage you'll encounter a boss enemy which you have to defeat in order to proceed. Geist Force was easily going to be one of the best looking games on the Dreamcast. It really pushed the hardware with smooth animations, amazing particle effects, extremely detailed textures, and a ton of action on the screen at once. If nothing else, Sega created a truly spectacular showcase for what the Dreamcast was capable of. Originally shown off at the 1998 Electronics Entertainment Expo and later that same year at the Tokyo Game Show, Geist Force was originally intended to be a launch title for the Dreamcast's initial release in Japan, but it wasn't completed in time to make this deadline. Sega pushed back the release date to the North American launch in September of 1999, but in May of 1999 it was announced that the title had been cancelled. Sega of America President Bernie Stoller is said to be responsible for the cancellation, as he felt the game wasn't up to the company's standards. In 2011, an unfinished build of the game was found and eventually released online for anyone to download. This build of the game is playable but unstable, and most of the later stages in the game are largely unfinished. Without a doubt, the Dreamcast had an amazing library of games, but the console's potential was far from being fully realized. Sega had a vision of the future of gaming, and Dreamcast was their attempt at showing the world what that vision was. Whether it be massive online worlds, mind-blowing graphics, or simply innovative gameplay experiences that would challenge the very definition of a video game. These are just a few of the many things that developers were attempting to bring to the Dreamcast. While we may never get to experience many of the games we've seen in this series, we can at least take a glimpse at Sega's vision of the future. That concludes this episode of The Games That Never Were, and until next time, thanks for watching.